The crimson desert of Kepler. 9 was silent beneath a cold and endless sky. The red sand stretched for miles in every direction, untouched and lifeless. Only the wind moved, whispering across the dunes like a forgotten ghost. Ethan Cole stood outside his small metal outpost, watching the horizon. He was a human salvage pilot, living far from the crowded worlds of the Galactic Empire. People said he chose this lonely life to avoid trouble. Others said he simply preferred peace. Ethan never explained himself. He worked, he survived, and he stayed out of the galaxy's affairs. That night, however, the galaxy came to him. A sudden roar shattered the silence. Ethan looked up. The sky tore open with a streak of blazing fire. A brilliant object burned across the heavens, glowing like a dying star. The desert lit up in shades of gold and crimson as the object screamed through the atmosphere. A thunderous explosion followed as it crashed into the distant dunes, sending a shockwave across the sands. The ground trembled beneath Ethan's boots. He narrowed his eyes. That wasn't a meteor, he muttered. Inside his outpost, old scanners flickered to life. Warning signals blinked across the dusty screen. Unidentified craft, catastrophic impact, unknown life signatures detected. Ethan hesitated. He had learned long ago that curiosity could be dangerous. The Galactic Empire ruled these sectors, and anything that fell from the sky often belonged to someone powerful and dangerous. He could walk away. No one would blame him. But as the wind carried the distant echo of the crash, something stirred within him. With a quiet sigh, Ethan grabbed his worn jacket, a med kit, and his pulse rifle. He powered up his desert speeder and drove toward the impact site. The journey was long and silent. Red sand whipped against the windshield as distant thunder rolled across the desert. As Ethan neared the crash site, the sky above flickered with faint streaks of light, ships entering orbit. He frowned. So, someone's looking for it. Moments later, the wreckage came into view. A massive ship lay half buried in the sand, its hull shattered and smoking. The metal glowed faintly, etched with golden symbols Ethan did not recognize. Strange energy pulsed along its surface, humming like a living heartbeat. This was no ordinary vessel. It was Imperial. Ethan slowed his speeder and stepped out, shielding his eyes from the heat. The air smelled of burning metal and ozone. Debris was scattered across the dunes like fallen stars. Then he heard it, a weak, ragged breath. Ethan followed the sound into the broken hull. Inside, the corridor was dark and filled with smoke. Sparks rained from torn wires, and flickering lights cast long shadows across the wreckage. At the center of the chamber lay a figure. Ethan froze. It was a dragon, not a creature of legend, but a living being, young, wounded, and barely breathing. Silver scales shimmered beneath the dim light, each one reflecting faint traces of gold. Torn royal armor covered the creature's body, marked with glowing imperial insignia. His golden eyes were half open, filled with pain and fading strength. A dragon prince. Ethan had heard stories of them, rulers of the celestial dragon empire, beings of immense power and ancient bloodlines. To find one here, alone and dying, was unthinkable. The prince's breath faltered. Ethan knelt beside him, opening his med kit. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're not dying tonight." The dragon's eye flickered toward him, filled with suspicion and fear. Ethan worked quickly, sealing wounds and stabilizing the prince with basic human medicine. The tools were simple, outdated by galactic standards, but they were reliable. Slowly, the dragon's breathing steadied. Then the sky thundered again. Ethan looked up. Through the broken hull, he saw distant warships descending through the clouds. Sleek black vessels, silent and deadly, bearing the marks of Imperial hunters. Searchlights swept across the desert as drones launched from their hulls. They were not here to rescue the prince. They were here to find him and ensure he never returned home. Ethan's jaw tightened. If they found the dragon alive, they would kill him, and anyone who stood in their way would share his fate. He had one last chance to walk away. Instead, Ethan lifted the wounded prince into his arms. The dragon was heavier than he expected, But Ethan did not falter. "You're coming with me," he said firmly. Outside, the wind howled as search drones descended toward the wreckage. Their crimson sensors cut through the darkness, scanning the desert for survivors. Ethan carried the dragon to his speeder and laid him gently inside. The prince's golden eyes opened slightly, watching the human in silence. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the dragon's voice, weak and barely audible, echoed in Ethan's mind. "Why help me?" Ethan paused, starting the engine as the speeder roared to life. "Because," he said simply, guiding the vehicle into the storm of red sand, "saving a life doesn't require a reason." Behind them, the wreckage burned. Above them, the Imperial fleet darkened the sky. And as Ethan disappeared into the desert with the dying dragon prince, he had no idea that his single act of kindness would shake an empire, change the fate of humanity, and begin a legend that the galaxy would never forget. The red storm swallowed the desert. Winds howled across Kepler 9, lifting waves of crimson sand into the night sky. Lightning flashed through the dust clouds, turning the world into a storm of fire and shadow. Through the chaos, Ethan Cole's speeder raced across the dunes, its engines roaring as search drones hunted overhead. Inside the vehicle, the wounded dragon prince lay motionless. His silver scales shimmered faintly, glowing with a dying golden light. Each breath he took was shallow, fragile, and uncertain. Ethan glanced back at him. "Stay with me," he said quietly. "You've survived this far. Don't give up now." The prince's eyes flickered open, glowing like fading stars. Though weak, his gaze remained proud. A faint voice echoed in Ethan's mind. "Human, you risked your life for a stranger." Ethan kept his eyes on the storm ahead. "You're not a stranger," he replied calmly. "You're someone who needs help." The dragon prince fell silent, as if trying to understand the meaning of those simple words. Moments later, warning alarms blared inside the speeder. Target lock detected. Ethan's grip tightened on the controls. Through the storm, crimson beams of light sliced across the sky. Imperial hunter drones descended like shadows, their glowing eyes scanning the desert. "They're fast," Ethan muttered. A pulse of energy struck the sand beside him, exploding in a cloud of fire. The speeder jolted violently. Ethan swerved between jagged rocks, guiding the vehicle through narrow canyons hidden beneath the storm. Another blast tore through the darkness, missing them by inches. Inside the speeder, the dragon prince stirred. Golden energy flickered weakly around his body, reacting to the threat. The air grew warm, and faint sparks of light drifted across the cabin like glowing embers. "You must leave me," the prince whispered telepathically. "If they find you with me, they will destroy you." Ethan's voice remained steady. "Then they'll have to try." The prince watched him in silence, astonished by the human's courage. At last, Ethan reached the entrance to a hidden canyon. He guided the speeder through a narrow passage carved into the rock, barely wide enough for the vehicle to pass. The storm swallowed their tracks, and the canyon walls blocked the scanners above. Moments later, the speeder disappeared into darkness. Deep beneath the desert, Ethan's underground shelter flickered to life. The hidden base was small but well-equipped, an old human bunker filled with outdated Earth technology, scavenged machinery, and medical supplies. The air smelled of metal and oil, and soft white lights illuminated the chamber. Ethan carried the dragon prince inside and laid him gently on a reinforced platform. "Let's keep you alive," he said, opening his med kit. The prince winced as Ethan worked, sealing deep wounds and stabilizing his breathing. Human medicine was simple compared to Imperial science, yet it proved surprisingly effective. Slowly, the dragon's pulse steadied, and the golden glow around his scales grew stronger. Hours passed in silence. At last, the prince opened his eyes fully. They shone with quiet strength and ancient dignity. "I am Aurelian," he said, his voice echoing gently within Ethan's mind. "Heir to the celestial dragon empire." Ethan nodded. "Ethan Cole, salvage pilot. Nothing special." Aurelian studied him carefully. "You saved my life, Ethan Cole." Few in this galaxy would risk such a choice. Ethan shrugged lightly. Where I come from, saving someone isn't special. It's simply the right thing to do. For the first time, the young dragon prince looked at a human not with suspicion, but with respect. Far above the desert, darkness gathered. A colossal warship emerged from hyperspace, its black hull gleaming beneath the stars. Crimson insignias burned along its surface, the mark of the Imperial Hunter Corps. Inside the command chamber, a towering dragon warlord stood before a holographic map of Kepler-9. His scales were dark as obsidian, and his eyes glowed with cold ambition. Report, he commanded. A mechanical voice replied. The prince's vessel has been located. No confirmed body has been recovered. Life signs remain unaccounted for. The warlord's gaze hardened. Then he lives, he said quietly. Deploy the hunter legions. Search every canyon, every ruin, every grain of sand. The heir must not return to the throne. As you command, Lord Varkon. Outside, fleets of hunter drones descended toward the planet like a swarm of shadows. Back in a hidden bunker, silence settled over the chamber. Ethan sat nearby, repairing his pulse rifle. Across the room, Aurelian rested, his strength slowly returning. Golden light pulsed gently from his scales, illuminating the walls with a soft glow. Suddenly, alarms echoed through the shelter. Surface scans detected. Multiple hostile units approaching. Ethan looked up calmly. Looks like your friends found us. Aurelian rose slowly, despite his injuries. They are not my friends, he said with quiet determination. They are hunters sent to ensure my death. The ground trembled as distant explosions echoed above. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the bunker lights flickered. Ethan stood, gripping his rifle. Then they chose the wrong desert. Aurelian watched him, astonished. You would fight an empire for me? Ethan checked the weapon's power cell and smiled faintly. I'm not fighting an empire, he said. I'm protecting a life. Outside, the storm roared as shadows descended upon the desert. Inside the bunker, a human and a dragon prince prepared to stand together against the darkness. And as the first hunter drones touched the sands above, the legend of humanity's courage began to grow, stronger, brighter, and far more dangerous than any empire had ever imagined. The desert above Ethan's bunker trembled under the weight of war. Hunter drones descended through the crimson storm like falling shadows. Their red sensors pierced the darkness, scanning every grain of sand. The thunder of distant warships echoed across the sky, shaking the ancient dunes of Kepler-9. Inside the underground shelter, warning alarms blared. Hostile units detected. Defense breach imminent. Ethan Cole stood calmly beside the reinforced door, his pulse rifle steady in his hands. Dust fell from the ceiling as explosions rumbled above. Across the chamber, the wounded dragon prince rose slowly from the medical platform, his silver scales glowing faintly with golden light. Aurelian's eyes burned with determination. They have come for me, he said, his voice echoing gently within Ethan's mind. If I remain, they will destroy you. Ethan checked his weapon and replied without hesitation. Then we make sure they don't. Aurelian studied him in silence. Never in his life had he seen such courage from a human. The Empire had always viewed humanity as fragile and insignificant. Yet this lone man stood ready to face an entire fleet without fear. You would fight an empire for a stranger, Aurelian said softly. Ethan gave a faint smile. You're not a stranger anymore. Before the prince could reply, a violent explosion shook the bunker. The outer defenses shattered, and the heavy door groaned beneath the impact of enemy fire. Sparks rained from the ceiling as red warning lights flooded the chamber. They're here, Ethan said calmly. The door burst open. Hunter drones surged inside, their metal wings slicing through the air. Crimson lasers ignited the darkness, striking the walls and sending showers of molten sparks across the floor. Ethan moved with precision. His pulse rifle roared to life, firing bursts of blue energy that tore through the drones. One exploded in a flash of light, then another. The narrow corridor filled with smoke and fire as he fought to hold the line. But more drones kept coming. Aurelian watched, his heart filled with awe. The human fought not with advanced technology or imperial power, but with courage, skill, and unwavering resolve. "You cannot hold them forever," the prince warned. Ethan reloaded calmly. "I don't need forever. I just need enough time." Another wave of drones advanced, their weapons charging with lethal energy. A blast struck the wall beside Ethan, throwing him to the ground. The rifle slid across the floor, and the chamber filled with smoke. Aurelian's eyes widened. Ethan, the human, struggled to rise, wounded but unbroken. He reached for his weapon, determined to continue the fight. In that moment, something ancient stirred within the dragon prince. Aurelian felt the fire of his blood awaken. Golden light began to radiate from his scales, growing brighter with each heartbeat. The air trembled as ancient power surged through his veins, the power of the celestial dragon bloodline. The bunker walls glowed with radiant energy. Ethan looked up, shielding his eyes. "Well, that's new." Aurelian rose to his full height, his wings of light unfolding in a blaze of gold. His wounds healed as flames of pure energy surrounded him, illuminating the chamber like a rising sun. "I am Aurelian," he declared, his voice echoing with ancient authority, "heir to the celestial dragon empire." With a single motion, he unleashed a wave of golden fire. The advancing drones were vaporized instantly, their metal forms dissolving into ash. The corridor fell silent as the radiant energy faded, leaving only drifting embers in the air. Ethan stared in awe. "Remind me never to stand on your bad side." Aurelian turned to him, his glowing eyes filled with gratitude. "You stood against death for me, Ethan Cole. No power in the galaxy can repay such a debt." Before Ethan could respond, the bunker trembled once more. A massive explosion shattered the desert above, and the ceiling cracked as debris rained down. "They're sending something bigger," Ethan said grimly. Above the surface, a colossal warship descended through the storm. Its dark hull blotted out the stars, and its engines thundered like the roar of a god. From its depths emerged armored dragon soldiers led by a towering warlord clad in black obsidian armor. Lord Varkon, the Imperial Hunter. "Prince Aurelian," Varkon's voice echoed across the desert. "Your escape ends here. Surrender, and your death will be swift." Aurelian's golden eyes hardened. "I will never kneel to a traitor." The ground erupted as the bunker collapsed under enemy fire. Ethan and Aurelian emerged into the open desert, surrounded by a storm of crimson sand and descending warships. Ethan raised his rifle, standing at the prince's side. "Looks like we're outnumbered." Aurelian looked toward the sky, his wings of light unfurling in brilliance. Not for long. With a powerful roar, the dragon prince transformed. Golden flames engulfed his body as his true form emerged. A majestic celestial dragon with radiant silver scales and blazing wings of light. His presence illuminated the desert, scattering the storm and casting shadows across the enemy fleet. The Imperial soldiers froze in awe. Ethan shielded his eyes, staring at the magnificent creature above him. "Now that is impressive." With a thunderous cry, Aurelian soared into the sky. Golden fire erupted from his jaws, striking the enemy warships with devastating force. Explosions lit the heavens as hunter drones fell like burning stars. The desert trembled beneath the fury of the awakened dragon heir. Lord Varkon watched in fury. Impossible. He should not have survived. Below, Ethan stood alone in the storm, watching the dragon prince battle an entire fleet to protect him. For the first time in history, a dragon fought not for conquest, but for a human. As the sky burned with golden fire, a new legend was born. And across the galaxy, whispers began to spread. A human had saved the dragon prince and awakened the power of an empire. The desert of Kepler, 9 fell silent after the storm of war. Smoke drifted across the crimson dunes as fragments of shattered warships burned in the sky like falling stars. Golden embers floated gently through the air, remnants of the celestial fire unleashed by Prince Aurelian. The once silent desert now carried the echo of legend. Ethan Cole stood alone amid the ruins, his pulse rifle lowered. His clothes were torn, and dust covered his face, but his eyes remained calm. Above him, the celestial dragon circled the heavens, his radiant wings illuminating the storm clouds like a second sun. Then the sky trembled once more. A deep, thunderous sound rolled across the horizon, far more powerful than the arrival of any warship. The clouds parted slowly, revealing a sight that stole the breath from the world. A colossal imperial fleet emerged from hyperspace. Thousands of golden warships filled the heavens, their hulls gleaming like living suns. At their center descended a magnificent flagship, larger than a city, adorned with radiant symbols of the celestial dragon empire. Its arrival turned the desert into a sea of golden light. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Well, this just keeps getting bigger. The flagship hovered above the battlefield, and a beam of pure golden energy descended to the sand. From within the light stepped an ancient and majestic figure, the Dragon Emperor. His scales shimmered with cosmic brilliance, and his presence carried the weight of countless centuries. His golden eyes glowed with wisdom and power, and every being in the galaxy knew his name. Emperor Valerian, sovereign of the celestial dragon empire. Prince Aurelian descended from the sky and transformed into his royal form, kneeling before the emperor. "Father," he said with respect. The emperor regarded his son in silence before speaking. His voice was deep and resonant, echoing across the desert. "You live, my son. The galaxy trembled at the thought of your loss." Aurelian rose slowly and turned toward Ethan. "I live because of him." All eyes fell upon the lone human standing in the sand. The imperial fleet grew silent. Dragon nobles, generals, and soldiers watched in disbelief as the emperor approached Ethan Cole. Never before had a human stood unbowed before the celestial dragon throne. Ethan remained calm, meeting the emperor's gaze without fear. "You are the human who saved my heir," Valerian said. "Yes," Ethan replied simply. The emperor studied him carefully. "You risked your life against hunters, warlords, and an empire. Tell me, human, what reward do you seek?" Ethan shrugged lightly. "Nothing. I only save a life." A murmur of astonishment spread through the imperial ranks. At a signal from the emperor, the sky ignited with golden light. A grand ceremonial platform descended from the flagship, adorned with radiant banners and ancient symbols. Trumpets of celestial energy echoed through the heavens as nobles and rulers from distant worlds appeared via holographic projection to witness history. "Ethan Cole," the emperor declared, "for your courage, honor, and compassion, I offer you the empire's greatest honor." The platform illuminated with blinding brilliance as the reward was revealed. A title of nobility, limitless wealth, command of imperial fleets, and a place among the stars as a guardian of the dragon throne. The galaxy watched in breathless silence. Aurelian stepped forward, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Accept this honor, Ethan. You have earned it. Stand beside us as a legend." For a moment, the desert was utterly still. Ethan looked at the golden throne, the vast fleet, and the emperor himself. He thought of the lonely outpost he called home, of the quiet life he had chosen, and of the simple truth that guided him. He took a step forward. Then he shook his head. "I cannot accept," he said calmly. Shock rippled through the imperial court. Dragon nobles whispered in disbelief. Never in the history of the empire had anyone refused such an honor, especially a human. The emperor's gaze sharpened. "You refuse the greatest gift in the galaxy." Ethan met his eyes without hesitation. "I did not save the prince for power, wealth, or titles. I saved him because it was the right thing to do. A life is not a bargain, and kindness is not a debt." Silence fell across the stars. Even the winds of the desert seemed to pause. Prince Aurelian stared at Ethan, astonished by his humility. In that moment, he understood why humanity was feared, not for its strength, but for its heart. Slowly, the Dragon Emperor lowered his head. The ruler of the most powerful empire in the galaxy bowed to a human. "Then you have given us something far greater than loyalty," Valerian said with reverence. "You have given us honor." The Imperial fleet followed his gesture, bowing in silent respect. Across the galaxy, rulers and civilizations witnessed the moment a human refused power and earned the admiration of an empire. Aurelian stepped forward and placed his hand over his heart. "Ethan Cole, your name will be remembered among the stars for all eternity." Ethan smiled faintly. "I'd prefer to be remembered as a man who did the right thing." Golden light faded as the ceremonial platform withdrew into the flagship. The Imperial fleet slowly ascended into the heavens, their radiant engines illuminating the desert one last time. Before departing, the Emperor spoke once more. "Humanity shall forever be honored within our empire. Should you ever call upon us, we will answer." With that, the fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving the desert silent once more. Ethan watched the stars fade, the wind whispering softly across the dunes. The galaxy had offered him glory beyond imagination, and he had refused it without regret. Beside him, Aurelian lingered for a moment, his eyes filled with respect. "You have changed the destiny of an empire," the prince said. Ethan looked toward the horizon. "Maybe, or maybe I just helped a friend." Aurelian smiled before ascending into the sky, his wings of light fading into the heavens. As the desert returned to silence, a legend spread across the galaxy, whispered in royal courts, sung by travelers, and recorded in the archives of countless worlds. A human saved the Dragon Prince and refused the Empire's greatest honor. And in that moment, humanity was no longer underestimated. It was revered. The crimson desert of Kepler 9 returned to silence. Days passed after the departure of the Imperial fleet. The golden glow of warships faded from memory, and the wind once again whispered across the endless dunes. To the galaxy, the battle had become a legend. To Ethan Cole, it was simply another memory buried beneath the quiet of his lonely life. He repaired his outpost, piece by piece. Burn marks scarred the metal walls, and broken machinery lay scattered across the sand. Ethan worked in silence, welding steel, repairing circuits, and restoring the humble shelter he called home. The desert sun rose and fell, painting the sky with shades of red and gold. To most, he was the man who refused an empire. To himself, he was simply a human who had done what was right. But the galaxy had not forgotten. Far across the stars, the celestial dragon empire changed. Within the grand halls of the imperial capital, Emperor Valerian sat upon his radiant throne. The court was silent as nobles and generals gathered beneath banners of gold. At his side stood Prince Aurelian, now healed and stronger than ever, his silver scales gleaming with celestial light. "The human named Ethan Cole," the emperor said, his voice echoing through the chamber, "has shown us the true strength of humanity. Not power, not conquest, but honor." Murmurs of agreement filled the hall. "For centuries," Valerian continued, "we judged humanity as weak and insignificant. We were wrong. From this day forward, the Celestial Dragon Empire shall stand beside them as allies, not rulers." With a single command, ancient laws were rewritten. Trade routes were opened, peace treaties were forged, and embassies were established across human worlds. For the first time in history, dragons and humans stood as equals. And at the heart of that change was a single human who had asked for nothing. Months later, beneath a quiet starlit sky, Ethan Cole stood outside his outpost, gazing at the heavens. The desert was calm, illuminated by distant constellations. He had returned to his routine, repairing salvage, maintaining his shelter, and living the peaceful life he had always chosen. Yet sometimes, when the wind whispered across the dunes, he wondered if the galaxy still remembered his name. Then the sky began to glow. A single golden vessel emerged from hyperspace, its radiant engines lighting the desert like a rising sun. Unlike the vast Imperial fleet, This ship came alone, silent and graceful. It descended gently onto the sands before Ethan's outpost. Ethan smiled faintly. I was wondering when you'd visit. The vessel opened, and a beam of golden light touched the desert. From within stepped Aurelian, no longer the wounded prince Ethan had rescued. He stood tall and regal, crowned in celestial armor, his presence radiant with power. He was now Aurelian, Dragon King of the Celestial Empire. Ethan folded his arms casually. You look important. Aurelian smiled warmly. I am. But today, I come not as a king, but as your friend. He stepped forward and, before the astonished human, bowed his head in respect. I owe you my life, Ethan Cole. Because of you, I live. Because of you, the Empire has changed. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. You don't need to bow to me. Aurelian raised his head, his golden eyes filled with sincerity. Perhaps not, but I choose to. He extended his hand. Come with me. Stand beside me as an advisor, a hero, and a friend. The stars await you. For a moment, Ethan gazed at the open skies, at the shining vessel, and at the countless worlds beyond. He could command fleets, walk among emperors, and live a life of glory. Instead, he looked back at his humble outpost and the quiet desert he called home. He smiled. I appreciate the offer, Ethan said gently. But my place is here. Aurelian nodded, understanding. You refuse power once again. Ethan shrugged. Some people chase greatness. I'm happy with peace. The Dragon King laughed softly. And that, Ethan Cole, is why you are truly great. They stood together beneath the stars, not as ruler and subject, but as equals bound by friendship and respect. Before departing, Aurelian presented a small object, a crystal medallion glowing with golden light. This is the mark of the celestial dragon, he said. Wherever you travel, you will be honored and protected. Call upon us, and we will answer. Ethan accepted the medallion with a quiet nod. Thank you, my friend. With a final smile, Aurelian returned to his vessel. The ship rose into the heavens, its golden light fading into the stars. The desert fell silent once more. Years passed, and the legend of Ethan Cole spread across the galaxy. Stories of the human who rescued a dying dragon prince and refused the Empire's greatest honor were told in royal courts and humble taverns alike. His name was recorded in imperial archives, sung in ballads, and remembered by countless civilizations. Humanity was no longer underestimated. It was respected, and whenever diplomats spoke of peace between dragons and humans, they spoke of the man who made it possible. On a quiet evening, as twin moons rose above the desert, Ethan sat outside his outpost, watching the stars. The golden medallion rested in his hand, glowing softly beneath the night sky. A distant streak of light crossed the heavens. Ethan smiled. Take care, my friend, he whispered. The wind carried his words across the dunes, and the stars shimmered in silent reply. Across the galaxy, a legend was forever etched into history. He rescued a dying dragon prince and refused the Empire's greatest honor. And because of that single act of kindness, an empire changed, a friendship was forged, and humanity's true strength was revealed, not in power, but in honor. This is the legacy of Ethan Cole. This is humanity at its finest.